Telltale Seaweed. Two sisters were motoring through Cape Cod late one stormy night in the early 1900s when their car broke down in an unpopulated area. Seeing an old, neglected house nearby, they went to the door and tugged on the bell pull. When no one answered, they looked through a nearby window whose shutter was banging in the bitter wind. The window was broken. Through the window, they could see a library. The dust lay heavy over everything. The women decided to take shelter for the night and find someone to tow the car the next day. They brought blankets in from the car, their feet leaving tracks in the thick dust of the floor as they settled in for the night. Sometime later, they were both suddenly awakened. A bedraggled sailor, dripping wet, was standing next to the fireplace as if he were looking to dry himself before a non-existent fire. The sailor was glowing in the dark. The braver of the sisters finally called out, strangled, "Who is there?" The sailor muttered something they could not make out and disappeared. Deciding it was a dream, the sisters lay back down to sleep. But the next morning, they found a patch of wet salt water by the fireplace and a piece of seaweed. And there were no footprints in the dust by the fireplace save their own. The sisters hurried out to their car. Soon, they were given a tow to the nearest village by a passing motorist. There they asked about the abandoned house. They were told the house had been empty for years. The people who owned it had a son who was driven from home by his father and had drowned at sea. The family had moved away because they claimed strange things kept happening at night. A few months later, one of the sisters told her tale at a dinner party. A museum curator seated near her volunteered to test the seaweed for her. The curator sent her a message several days later. The message simply said that the seaweed she had found in the abandoned house was a rare type of seaweed only found on dead bodies. That pesky fellow, a fisherman from Newfoundland, was having difficulty finding someone to assist him. Help was scarce, and he couldn't find a soul to hire. Then one day he saw a handsome fellow in fancy city clothes walking along the docks. This was obviously not a man looking for work, but the fisherman still called out, half in jest, "Are you looking for some work?" To his surprise, the city man nodded and jumped into the boat. They agreed to split the catch into 3 parts, one for the city man, one for expenses, and one for the fisherman. Then they set out in the boat. At first, the skipper caught 3 fish to every fish caught by the city man. He was quite disgusted with this performance. At this rate, he would have done better fishing alone. So he said, "Am I supposed to catch all the fish for you? Why don't you catch some?" "Well then, if it's fish you're looking for," said the pesky stranger, "how about these?" He grabbed the fish gaff and smacked the port side of the vessel 3 times. "Come aboard, fish," he shouted. Immediately, fish of every shape and size came leaping out of the water on the port side and flopped into the bottom of the boat. The stranger then hit the starboard side of the boat 3 times, and fish came hopping and flopping in from that direction until the boat was so full the skipper could barely see the stranger over the mound of fish. "Stop or you'll drown us both," he shouted to the city man. Well, that pesky city fellow held up the fish gaff and immediately the fish stopped jumping into the boat. The skipper had the catch and then grinned in delight at the city man. "I wish I brought us a spot of rum," he cried enthusiastically. "We should celebrate this fine catch." "A spot of rum, coming up," said that pesky fellow. He bored a hole into the mast with a little gimlet he took from his pocket and outpoured enough rum to fill a mug. Then he bored a second hole into the mast and poured himself some whiskey. By this time, the skipper was marveling at the magic produced by the pesky city fellow, but he wasn't about to ask how he pulled off such stupendous tricks. He was just grateful to benefit from them. He topped off his rum from the hole in the mast and then turned the boat towards shore. The stranger wanted to steer, but the skipper wasn't sure where that pesky fellow would take the boat, so he politely declined the offer and the man grinned knowingly and poured himself some more whiskey. When they reached the docks, the 2 men sat down and started dividing the catch between them. "Lay out one for you, one for expenses, "And one for the devil," the pesky city fellow said with a lazy grin. So that was what the skipper did. He made 3 piles, and they kept throwing the fish one at a time into a pile, chanting, "One for me, one for expenses, one for the devil," until the entire catch was divided. The skipper put the devil's portion on a wooden rack called a stage that was used for drying fish. "Much obliged," said the pesky fellow with a happy grin. He kicked over the stage, leapt into the sea with his portion of the catch, and the whole kit and caboodle disappeared in a puff of smoke. The skipper shook his head a few times. Then he went back to the mast to pour himself some more rum. But both of the boreholes had disappeared along with the pesky fellow. The barn dance. As I drove down the seemingly endless dark road, I cursed my friends. "A quaint little barn in the middle of nowhere," they said. Well, they got that right. There was not one blessed sign of civilization anywhere to be seen. Just then, I caught a glimpse of a lighted barn on down the road. Civilization at last. I slowed down and pulled up to the round barn. My headlights caught a number of wagons, carriages, and buggies parked beside it. They were having an old-time barn dance, I thought as I pulled in and made my way to the door. The party was in full swing as I stepped through the large double doors. The center of the barn was filled with swirling dancers dressed in the costumes of yesteryear. These folks had gone to a great deal of trouble to recreate an authentic barn dance. A large bearded chap clapped me on the shoulder in greeting and handed me a mug of beer. I took a sip and then gulped it down eagerly. It was the best beer I'd ever tasted. Then a dark-eyed beauty grabbed me by the hand and pulled me out onto the dance floor. I was flying high, dancing and drinking, and singing along. Around midnight, the band took a break and I stood with my new acquaintances before a table lined with drinks. "Give us a toast to the night," giggled my inebriated beauty. "To a delightful night," I said, loudly. "Good fortune and long life to everyone present." The crowd went silent when they heard my words. The stillness grew, flowing outward like a wave, until you could have heard a pin drop. As I glanced uneasily about me, I saw the skin slowly peeling away from the merry faces until all that remained were bone, rotting skin, and staring eye sockets. The girl in my arms was nothing but a skeleton in a moldy blue dress. With a gasp of horror, I dropped my mug and leapt away from the skeleton. The mug hit the floor with a loud bang, and the lights went out. I screamed in terror and stumbled backward, slamming into a damp, foul-smelling pile of hay. I frantically tried to find my way to the door. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I spotted the barn doors across the hall. I rushed toward them, withered and bony hands grabbing at me as I ran. Then I was out in the moonlight and racing to my car. I leapt into the car and backed down the lane as fast as I could go. My headlights caught the dilapidated barn with half of its roof missing and walls sagging inward. I slammed the car into gear and drove as fast as I could. Somehow, I found the way back to my home and spent the remainder of that restless night sleeping with the light on in my bedroom. To this day, I have no idea where I was. I heard later that folks in Vernon County sometimes hear strange music drifting over the hills at night, though no one can identify its source. In my mind, I can still see the bright, happy faces of the ghostly farmers dancing the night away in a rotting old barn. The bells. There once was an evil priest who did not fear God or man. His duties for the church included counting the offerings and ringing the bells to summon people to Massachusetts. But his heart was filled with greed, and he began to take advantage of the good people of his parish. The priest stole money out of the offerings to keep for himself, and when he had filled a chest full of gold, he killed a man and buried him with the chest so the murdered man's ghost would guard it. Anyone who tried to dig for the treasure would be devoured by the skeleton of the murdered man. The evil priest planned to return to Spain with his ill-gotten treasure, but he fell ill with a fever a week before his ship was scheduled to leave. On his deathbed, the priest repented of his crime. He swore to his confessor that his soul would not rest until he returned the gold to God. The priest died before he could reveal the place where the treasure was buried. As he gasped out his last breath, he said, "Follow the bells. They will lead you to the treasure." The padre who attended the dying priest did not heed his words. But the sweeper who was working in the hallway at the time of the evil priest's death was struck by the notion of buried treasure. He was very poor and wanted a better life for himself and his family, so the sweeper determined to take the treasure for himself. Each night for a week, he took a shovel and dug in the monastery gardens, searching for the priest's treasure. He found nothing. One night the sweeper was awakened from his dreams by the sound of the parish bells ringing out loudly in the darkness. He leapt to his feet, fearing some emergency, and then realized that his wife and children had not stirred in their beds. Remembering the evil priest's last words, the sweeper felt sure that the mysterious ringing of the bells was for his ears alone, to lead him to the treasure. Taking his shovel, the sweeper followed the sound of the church bells up and up into the hills. He was gasping for breath when he reached the source of the sound. He was on a wide ledge overlooking the valley. 2 trees guarded the spot, and it was beside these trees that the glowing, ghostly church bells hovered. Taking his shovel, the poor sweeper dug a deep hole among the roots of the trees. After several moments, his shovel hit something hard. Eagerly, he swept the dirt away from the object and found a small chest. He hauled it out of the ditch with trembling hands, placed it on a rock, and broke the lock with the edge of his shovel. When he opened it, piles of yellow gold met his dazzled eyes. He gathered up a handful of coins, reveling in the weight of so much money. The coins were cool to his touch, and he felt the smoothness of the metal as he rubbed the coins between his fingers. And that was when he heard the moaning. Looking up, the sweeper saw the skeleton of the murdered man whom the evil priest had buried with the treasure. It was rising out of the pit under the trees, eye sockets glowing with blue flames. "Mine," the skeleton intoned, stretching its bony arms toward the sweeper. "Mine." The sweeper screamed in terror and leapt away from the box of treasure, dropping the coins that he held in his hands. He ran down the hill as fast as he could go, the skeleton in hot pursuit. Behind him, the bells began to ring again as he fled for his life from the ledge. The sweeper kept running long after the sounds of pursuit ceased, and did not stop until he reached his home. It was only then that he realized he had left his shovel back with the buried treasure on top of the hill. It was an expensive shovel, and he could not afford to lose it. Waiting until daylight, the sweeper went reluctantly back up into the hills to retrieve it. When he reached the ledge, there was no sign of the skeleton, the chest of money, or the hole he had dug the night before. He found his shovel at the top of a tall tree whose first branches began nearly 20 feet above his head. The skeleton must have placed it there after it chased him down the hill, he decided grimly, knowing that there was no way he could retrieve it. Turning sadly away, the sweeper's eye was caught by a gleam in the bushes near the rock where he had placed the treasure chest the night before. Carefully, keeping his eye on the place where the skeleton lay buried, the sweeper felt around the rock until his hand closed on 2 gold coins that the ghost had missed. Casually, he put the coins in his pocket and hurried from the ledge. When he got home, the sweeper put the coins into a sock and hid it under the floorboard for safekeeping. The sweeper never went back to the ledge to retrieve the evil priest's buried treasure, though sometimes he was still awakened by the mysterious sound of the bells. He knew it would take someone more pious than himself to banish the ghost of the murdered man and reclaim the money for God. But he did use the gold coins to send his eldest son to school, and with the leftover change, he bought himself a new shovel. The Black Cat's message. I came home late one night after work and found my wife Ethel puttering about the kitchen with a big yellow cat at her heels. "And who is this?" I asked jovially. "This is our new cat," said Ethel, giving me a hug and a kiss to welcome me home. She just appeared at the kitchen door and wanted to come in. None of the neighbors know where she came from, so I guess she's ours. It will be nice to have some company around the house. I bent down and scratched the yellow cat under the chin. She purred and stretched. Well, I think our income can stretch far enough to feed 3, I said. My son had taken over my job at the mercantile, and my wife and I were enjoying a leisurely old age. I like to keep busy though, and so I spent a few hours every day cutting and hauling wood to be used at the mill. I went out to milk the cow, and when I came back in, Ethel gave the cat some cream in a saucer. We sat on the porch after dinner, and the cat sat with us. "You are a very nice kitty," I said to her. She purred loudly. "Donald," Ethel said. She sounded worried. I turned to look at her. The neighbors acted rather oddly when I told them about the cat. They seemed to think she was a ghost or a witch of some sort, transformed into a cat. They told me to get rid of her. "A witch?" I asked, and laughed heartily. "Are you a witch, little cat?" The cat yawned and stretched. Reluctantly, Ethel started to laugh with me. It seemed such a ludicrous notion. We sat watching the beautiful sunset and then took ourselves to bed. The cat quickly became an essential part of our household. She would purr us awake each morning and would beg for cream when I brought in the morning's milking. She followed Ethel around supervising her work during the day and would sit by the fire at night while we read aloud. The days became shorter as autumn approached, and often I would work until nearly sunset, cutting and hauling wood. One night in October, I didn't finish hauling my last load until dusk. As soon as I had piled the last log, I started down the road, hoping to get home before dark since I had not brought a lantern with me. I rounded a corner and saw a group of black cats standing in the middle of the road. They were nearly invisible in the growing dark. As I drew nearer, I saw that they were carrying a stretcher between them. I stopped and rubbed my eyes. That was impossible. When I looked again, the stretcher was still there, and there was a little dead cat lying on it. I was astonished. It must be a trick of the light, I thought. Then one of the cats called out, "Sir, please tell Aunt Kim that Polly Grundy is dead." My mouth dropped open in shock. I shook my head hard, not believing my ears. How ridiculous, I thought. Cats don't talk. I hurried past the little group, carefully looking the other way. I must be working too hard, I thought. But I couldn't help wondering who Aunt Kim might be. And why did the cat want me to tell her Polly Grundy was dead? Was Polly Grundy the cat on the stretcher? Suddenly, I was confronted by a small black cat. It was standing directly in front of me. I stopped and looked down at it. It looked back at me with large green eyes that seemed to glow in the fading light. "I have a message for Aunt Kim," the cat said. "Tell her that Polly Grundy is dead." The cat stalked past me and went to join the other cats grouped around the stretcher. I was completely nonplussed. This was getting very spooky. Talking cats and a dead Polly Grundy. And who was Aunt Kim? I hurried away as fast as I could walk. Around me, the woods were getting darker and darker. I did not want to stay in that wood with a group of talking cats. Not that I really believed the cats had spoken. It was all a strange, waking dream brought on by too much work. Behind me, the cats gave a strange shriek and called out together, "Old man, tell Aunt Kim that Polly Grundy is dead." I'd had enough. I sprinted for home as fast as I could go and didn't stop until I had reached the safety of my porch. I paused to catch my breath. I did not want to explain to Ethel that I was seeing and hearing impossible things. She would dose me with castor oil and call the doctor. When I was sufficiently composed, I went into the house and tried to act normally. I should have known it wouldn't work. Ethel and I had been married for 30 years, and she knew me inside and out. She didn't say anything until after I had finished the chores. Then she sat me down in front of the fire and brought me my supper. After I'd take a few bites and started to relax, she said, "Tell me all about it, Donald." "I don't want to worry you," I said, reluctant to talk about what I had seen and heard on the way home. The yellow cat was lying by the fire. She looked up when she heard my voice and came to sit by my chair. I offered her a morsel of food, which she accepted daintily. "I'll worry more if you don't tell me," said Ethel. "I think maybe something is wrong with my brain," I said slowly. "While I was walking home, I thought I saw a group of black cats carrying a stretcher with a dead cat on it. Then I thought I heard the cats talking to me. They asked me to tell Aiken that Polly Grundy was dead." The yellow cat leapt up onto the windowsill. "Polly Grundy is dead?" she cried. "Then I am the queen of the witches." She switched her tail and the window flew open with a bang. The yellow cat leapt through it and disappeared into the night, never to return. Ethel had to dump an entire bucket of water over my head to revive me from my faint. The good news, she told me when I sat up, dripping and swearing because the water was ice cold, is that you have nothing wrong with your brain. The bad news is that our cat has just left us to become the queen of the witches. We'll have to get another cat. "Oh no," I said immediately. I've had enough of cats. "We got a dog."